Ladies and gentlemen, this is another episode of Product Innovation Show with your guest host, Sergey Ross. I'm here with Sean Dekkers, who's the head of product design at Digits, a fintech company building tools for businesses and finance professionals. In the past, Sean worked at Google, IDEO, McKinsey, and Visa, all world-class kind of companies. Super excited to have him here with us today. Sean, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So you work as a head of product design. When you are at a party or you meet somebody and they ask you, what do you do? How do you explain that?
Gosh, that's a fun one. There's a lot of parts to it. I mean, on one end, I feel like I'm part therapist, so I like to, just talk to a lot of folks, try to understand their problems. That's probably the core of it. The more that we understand the problem, the better equipped we are to solve it. And then the second part is that once we understand the problem space, we can start to come up with ideas on how to potentially solve it. So very collaborative. I'm talking with, probably 30 to 50 people a week on both sides, on the client side and engineers, and try to basically build that common ground to try to build that bridge between the two and see if we can solve whatever is ailing them at that point in time. There's a lot of problems, so it keeps me busy.
So you're like a facilitator almost.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think over the years, my role has changed a lot from at the beginning being very focused on craft to now I'm just like a conduit facilitator to try to like build a process, design process to make sure that leaders have the right information to make the best decision, and also that the clients and customers are all heard and provide a voice for those folks.
Hmm. What do you hear? What kind of bad recommendations do you hear in product design? Maybe when you're having a beer, or maybe you've seen it online or overheard. Like, what is the stuff that shouldn't be done but is recommended?
Such a fun question. Um, there's so many directions you can go with that. I think the big thing that I'm always worried about, the red flag, is I hear the phrase, "I have an idea," and
Mm.
every time I hear that, I'm a little bit worried, because I think the way that we should be thinking about it is like, oh, I heard about this problem, or there's this really interesting problem. And I think I'd love if people would kind of shift from focusing on like ideas and solutions to going back to the problem, and just one, make sure it's a really good problem and it's an important problem, and has impact. And then once you've done all that due diligence then we could start thinking about ideas, and even not even really being limited to one idea. Like there's plenty of ways to solve a problem. So, keep your mind open to all the different possibilities, even the things that don't even pop up immediately. So you gotta leave no stones unturned.
How do you personally collect ideas? Because I would imagine you have all sorts of these kinds of shower thoughts. Where do you normally put them? What's your process like to filter them out, record them?
Yeah, so I think I really live by the double diamond design approach. And what that means is you start at the beginning and you diverge, which means you go wide and you try to find all the different problems out there in a particular space, if it's finance or mobility or whatever, space travel. You find all the different problems and then you converge. You find the best problem that you're most equipped to solve, and that has the most viable and feasible, that's there's technology available to solve. So once you've found that problem, then you do it again. You converge again. You try to find all the 100, 500 different ways you can solve it, and then converge back on that one, the, the, the best solution, the one that's most appropriate and cost efficient and all the other things. Um, Everything else, just put in a parking lot. It's cool.
Right.
We'll come back to it. The world,
Mhm.
the world might not be ready for it. So, yeah.
What about your career wake up call moments? I call them that in a sense that
Mhm.
what's something that was big that happened in your career that made you to radically change the way that you do things or either think about things in a different way. That could be either a product or it could be design or it could be, for example, user feedback. Any of those
Mhm.
moments that you've seen, experienced?
Yeah, I think IDEO was really transformational. To me, it's not even just a designer, but as a human. I think uh, prior to the IDEO experience, I felt like I was like inadequate. Sorry, just gotta get a glass of water.
Oh, no problem.
So I think the one moment that was really transformational for me was IDEO. I think prior to IDEO, I really had this idea of what design was, and it's more like the end artifact, the end piece of value, or the design or whatever. And I thought that's all design was. So prior to that, I really focused on that. Like I wanted to be the best craftsperson ever to make the best piece of design or product or whatever. But what IDEO kind of taught me was it's more about the process. It's more about understanding the problem space and going through the listening part, which is probably the most important part of the whole process, because it's really easy to build the wrong thing, and I think a lot of folks that have been around for a little bit have inevitably built the wrong thing. Something that like doesn't take off, or maybe didn't satisfy the needs, or something. So I think just listening to users and really spending um, as much time as you can to evaluate ideas and make sure that um, the idea that you're going with is like has been vetted and you've done your due diligence and so on. So yeah,
So
listening to the customer.
less married to the actual design, but more towards like, does it actually solve the problem?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, like it's really important for us to understand our role in society, in the world, and so on. We don't necessarily have to be experts on everything. I think our role is more this facilitation. Like we need to understand the problem so we can give it to folks that specialize in solutions to try to, I guess, crowdsource everybody's expertise. I think our society
Mhm.
today, everyone is increasingly specialized. So, if you have the right folks that can solve it, let's just give them the right information at the right time and let them help us solve it. But, make sure that you're solving the right problem in the right way. So I think it just philosophically changed how I see my role in the process and in the world and everything.
What was your philosophy before IDEO from the process perspective? You are, for
Mhm.
example, you're looking to build the best product, and how did you look at the process before IDEO?
I think before there's probably a little overconfidence, and I definitely, I think most 20 something folks in the designer, I think we get, um, I think design school maybe teaches you maybe the wrong things a little bit. Um, I think
In what way?
aesthetic. Oh, I just think aesthetic is maybe like a little there's maybe too much value assigned to it, and like finesse and obviously these things are really really important. Like the way that someone feels when they're using a product, or with the way they engage a product, is super important. But there are other things that are really important too. So I think um, prior I put too much weight on maybe aesthetic and craft and the visualization and all the polished things that maybe come later
Mhm.
in the process. and not enough focus on like the actual end user.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think there was really valuable mistakes that come in youth and ambition, and being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed is really helpful. But there's also you need to go through these steps to maximize your impact.
Totally. You had a few interesting stories about working with luxury car makers. And tell us about one of them, like working with car with the keys, with the design of the keys
Hmm.
for a luxury vehicle. You're
Sure.
talking like 100,000 plus, like 200,000 plus type of level. And how do you approach the design there? Because the aesthetics is such a key element in it.
Hmm. Well, that was a fun one because yeah, if we were to take a step back and understand the problem, there's a few different problems there. On one end, luxury cars gain in value, and folks tend to go through them every 1 or 2 years. The average owner is going to be selling their car, and what's it's kind of a bummer because every time they sell it, it's a bit like art in a way that the artist doesn't really get a piece of that transaction. So it's an appreciating asset, and once it's sold, there's no way for the creator, the luxury car maker, to capture that money. And on the other end of on for the customer, they have a subpar experience too. The thing that we really found was interesting. I think this was the core insight.
Mhm.
Whenever you approach a new problem space, it's important to just eh, forget everything that you know about or what you think you know about it, and just come in like completely fresh. And we just started to talking to owners, and the thing that we heard was that they would kind of like steal little bits from the car. Say they had like three or four over a lifetime, and they were really meaningful to them. They represent like pride and success, and they represent maybe times with their dad, or going to the racetrack, all the activities, stuff like that. So what they would do, they'd steal like a lug nut, or like a piece of like maybe the manual or whatever. People had like different kind of interests, and they had like little shrines of like, hey, these are all the cars that I've had, and I'm so proud of them. So we're looking at that, we're like, huh, okay, so this is the existing human behavior. People are
Yeah.
sentimental about these things. How can we capture that? How can we leverage this existing behavior? So we're looking at this one pain point, and the big pain point that we heard was the key. And we went into the project not really knowing what we were going to do or anything. We're just like, all right, let's try to help this business, increase their bottom line. So we heard this pain point of folks like buying $500,000 car, and they'd get a key, and it was kind of like busted and scratched and old and whatever, just like
Yeah.
wasn't a nice experience. Especially something that you spend $500,000 on, like you kind of want like a nice one. So
And
we put the two
and
together.
you were saying, Sean, that you actually spend a lot of time with the key, more time with the key than the car.
It's true. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people, yeah, like it's part of them. Like they put it on the desk, or when you go to a meeting, you put it on the table, and it represents like a little bit more than it's a little bit of showiness, but it's just more intimate. You spend a lot more time with the key than you do the car for
Right.
sure. But what's interesting is we put those two things together, and we're like, okay, we have people with this existing behavior of stealing stuff from the car, and this problem, this pain point of the key is not kind of up to their expectations. Like, what if we put them together? And so what we did is we created this key that stays with the customer instead of with the car. So we flipped the idea of the key kind of on its head. And what's nice about that is when you buy a car, most Ferraris are secondhand. um, and you have the option to customize and personalize your car. It could be made of gold or, diamonds or whatever. And there you go. You get to keep the key when you're done. You pass it on to someone else, and they have the ability to customize their own key as well. So it's the thing that they can keep forever. And put it on their wall or something like that, and end up being wildly successful. So a lot of interest. Mm-hmm.
Right. So essentially they make a copy of the key, right? So let's say you have a secondhand Ferrari, and those cars, they like 1,000 kilometers a range is already like a lot of miles for that car. Like 1,000 miles, for example. That's like a lot. That's like a super, it's like 200,000 in Toyota Corolla kind of money. And so let's say you are reselling that Ferrari, and the company you worked with, they basically make a similar key or a custom key that looks like an original, or it's a completely customized version for an original owner. And then the owner who buys one, the new owner, then they do get either the old key or they can get another key again with the custom design of their choice. Is that the
Yeah, a
way
little
that
bit
works?
like that. I think it would be more like, they would have to buy a new key every time. And I think that there's obviously different price scales, but the nice thing about that for the business is they're able to make more revenue on resale, and that's something that most car companies haven't figured out how to do yet. Because not every car is an appreciating asset, of course, but it's very rare for like a car company to be able to recapture some of that. So as long
Mhm.
as you have the audience that's willing to do that, if you're buying a Corolla, maybe you don't really want to spend extra for like a new key. Of course, it's more of a pain point. But once you get into like luxury cars, it's like a little bit different, So people are willing to pay a little bit more, and it's nice because it sort of subsidizes other parts of their business. To racing is a huge factor for them, and yeah, just the cars are handmade and beautiful
Yeah.
pieces of art. So you're financing the whole thing, the artist, I would call it, more than a car company.
Right. No, and it's important to have that context because it's like basically people who buy those $50,000 to $100,000 watches. Those are the guys who
Yes.
collect those watches. Those are the kind of folks who have that mindset and that thinking that is similar to a car key. So it's not like an actual necessarily utility, although it is. It's also the something
Mhm.
that a piece of luxury that you would normally have, and it could be your memory and all of that stuff. But then that's the reason they would spend that much money on it and would actually care. Versus for somebody who's buying a normal car, it's a key. You just open it. That's
Mhm.
it. Like that's where the value ends.
Yeah, and I think other car companies have kind of caught on to this a little bit, because I'm starting to see a little bit more out there now. So it's fun to see, this tiny little idea that came just from talking to a couple dozen owners, and just recognizing this teeny tiny little thing. Like for us, is just this lug nut collection that was beautifully displayed. It's just like a passing thing. We just noticed it. We're like, oh, what's that? And then from the start of that, just this little thing ends up being, the core of like, this potentially big. I can't speak to, you know, um, how it is doing, or if it's still in production,
Sure.
um, but yeah, it's just this little thing can sometimes create big waves and really influence like entire sectors. So I think that's probably the fun part of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. That discovery. How many folks, Sean, did you need to interview once you gained that critical piece of evidence to say, you know what, this is like we should actually go and do something, or maybe do like a trial run? Like how many people do you need to have that confirmation?
Well, there's a few different answers to that. I think it really depends. Like on some projects, like if you need to find a good overlap for sure.
But if we take
There's
the one with
wonderful.
the key, if we just stay
Mhm.
with the car key example,
So, how many people did we have to talk to in order to
yes,
find the pattern? Not
yeah.
very many.
After you found that you had that insight, you're like, okay, it's how many people
Yeah.
you needed to speak after.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as we recognized it, oh, we just asked, like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the key? Oh my God, it's a visceral experience, like two more people. And we're like, all right, this is what we need to focus on, guys. It would be fun to redesign,
Mhm.
a beautiful luxury car like that, but let's focus on this little piece of impact because if this is what everyone hates, we got to do it. So yeah.
What is the one product design feature or product design that you worked on that didn't really go super well?
Oh
What was
gosh.
something that was just like that little horror story or big horror story
Mhm.
that unfolded?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few. There's the one that comes to mind is I think I spoke earlier about this about jumping into, hey, I have an idea,
Yes.
and then your whole life becomes about like bringing that idea to life, or that's your hypothesis. So in one case, I worked in the mining industry. Mining is a really important part of the world. We all have iPhones. Basically, anything that isn't wood has been extracted from the ground. So it's everything from copper to rare earths to lithium to whatever. Just look around your room and you'll understand just how much the world depends on it. So, anyways, it's a very I'd say for designers a little bit neglected of an industry. So we're looking at this problem space, and someone has an idea, and this is a little bit before my time. They're like, what if we? So there's one part of this mining process where you need to scan the entire geometry, the surface, the topology of the land, and you have to be able to simulate what's going to happen after the extraction process. So that's like a long way of saying like you just need to like constantly scan and capture data all the time. So
And
someone
this
had an
is
idea.
and
Yeah,
Sean,
yeah.
and this is it works in a similar way as before you start digging up the land and then setting up the perimeter and
Mm-hmm,
like oil drilling, right? Analogy. I'm more familiar with
mm-hmm.
that. Before you do all of that, you need to have like some kind of a model, 3D or whatever, to say this is what it's going to look like, and we're going to put these buildings and that stuff, and you need to scan first.
Yep, you got it. Yeah, and most importantly, it's a safety thing because
Right.
you need to evaluate. So sometimes there's explosions involved,
Yeah.
depending on what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's extraction, sometimes there's explosion, and so on. There's all these different processes. So what the computer is really good at is like simulating, hey, if you like do this, this, and this to this piece of land, then this will happen and
Right.
everything's good. But if you kind of mess it up,
Mhm.
people can get hurt. And it
Right.
happens, we have a long history of people getting hurt. So yeah, there's two things. It's optimization and safety and so on. So anyways, the someone had an idea like, oh, what if we had drones to do
Mhm.
all this, scanning for us? We've built robots to do this thing. Like, let's just do that. And on the surface, like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's just go do that. So the vision is very sound and it makes a lot of sense in theory
Mhm.
and everything. So the organization I was working with was had been building this flight drone flight simulator controller and photogrammetry system to turn the land into 3D and Everything was great. The
Yeah.
problem was that they've never tested it before. So that
Hmm.
that was the moment. That was the moment at which I came into the process, and I'm like, "Hey, this is cool, guys. Everything's great. Let's go try it out." And everyone's like, "Wait, what? Like it works?" I'm like, "Well, let's go see." So I brought the whole team and we tried it out, and it did not work even slightly. Some of the problems are, the FAA has a lot of regulations over drone and certain areas. You can't fly, and then other things is like sometimes it's cold. If you're up in Alaska or different parts of the world that are a little bit chilly, like batteries don't really work as well. And then you have other issues like range or, photogrammetry, and then all these other things. So um, there's all these problems with that potential solution. Even though it sounds great on paper and it makes a lot of sense, sometimes the reality of the situation is that, hey, we're dealing with physics, and physics is like a pretty tough thing to jump on. So that I think that was a good learning for a lot of folks. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of time wasted, and uh, but that happens too. So uh, figuring out how to tactfully navigate that and improve the product from there. That's
Mm.
that requires a little bit of fun.
Of course, and there's some learnings along the way, which is pretty
Mm-hmm.
natural. What do you think, Sean, and what point of the project would have made sense to test? Like like where when did they miss that window?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of components there that you could test individually. So the first thing that I did was tested each individual element to see which element was the weakest link. So, for instance, photogrammetry is you don't necessarily need a drone to do it. So, photogrammetry is where you take a bunch of photos and you just kind of stitch them together, and based off their depth it will give you like a 3D model. So I went basically down the street and went to a closet, and I pulled out a broom and I duct taped the photogrammetry computer to the top of a broom, and I just started scanning. And I'm like, all right, cool. Well, that works. That's good. And then we go to the drone. We're like, okay, this is like the weakest link here. We have all these things. How can we solve it? And the reality is like this is a pretty weak link. Let's find another way to solve it. And then there's all these other things like
Yeah.
um, factors. But if you start breaking down every piece into its individual variable and do this thing called paper prototyping, that's like jargon, design jargon for
Mm.
start simple. Let's do it with cardboard. Let's do it with foam. Let's do it with broomsticks. Let's do it with whatever we have laying around the
Yeah.
house. And if we can do that, then we're in a good place. So yeah.
Mm. Apple comes to mind. They always make like 50 or like 100 iPhones. At least they used to back in the day, with
Mm-hmm.
foam, like some like dense foam, and they would be testing like all these like 0.01 inch in increasing numbers of
Mm-hmm.
sizes, shapes, and everything, and all their product design. So like so much testing is done, like you're saying, basically with those materials.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like every good industrial designer is probably a really good woodworker, or has
Yeah.
a pretty killer wood shop. So it's funny, I have like tons of foam and wood tools, and I'm constantly just like, shaping foam into different things. And because you can do a really quick thing and learn so much from it in minutes. So I think it's really important for people to not jump too quickly into the box, because it just doesn't give you as much. It doesn't give you presence like an actual product, a physical thing. So yeah.
I'm a big fan of mobile phones, of smartphones. And what is shocking to me still is how many manufacturers right now do the curved screen. And when they started doing curved screens, it looked cool. I'll give them that. It looked cool. But
Hmm.
ergonomically, it is absolutely disastrous. It's disastrous. It fits terribly in your hand, even if you try
Hmm.
to make the edge as smooth as you can, which is very difficult when the glass goes inside the aluminum side. It's very difficult to do, but it's also like the ergonomics in terms of accidental touches are incredibly difficult to solve with the software. It
Hmm.
almost never works perfectly. And but they keep doing it. They keep doing it. So that is just so surprising. Like, why would it is such a massive sacrifice? And if you look at Apple, Apple obviously never done that and never even tried. But like these guys, I'm mostly speaking about Chinese companies. They keep like
Yeah.
hammering one after another after another. Like, why?
Well, it's one word. It's called marketing. You know, when a marketing team is like running the company, you know, there's probably some sound evidence saying that consumers may or may not be interested in something like that. And you know, once that comes through, um, it's hard to not go down that road, even though yeah, like the design isn't you know that great or whatever. But at the moment, you see like oh, people like might be interested in curve phones. Let's give it a go. And you know, a lot of products fail, so it's hard to tell. But yeah, unless it's solving like a real problem, I think just keep it simple. You know, so yeah.
Right, but it's these are like degrees of emphasis based
Hmm.
on the competition, which is smartphones are ridiculously terrible, like it's terrible, probably the worst market to be at because
Hmm.
how many products are there. But also maybe to your point, a little bit because of the company is influenced by people who are in marketing more. So then your
Hmm.
ergonomics is still on the list, but it's just like somewhere further down.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of folks, it's like the bottom line is the priority, and sometimes like you know user experience and user needs. Unfortunately, it seems like the older a company gets, the more detached they get from their customers. And I'm not sure why that happens because in theory, the bigger you get, the better off, the more in touch with customers you should be because you have more people, you know, and more access. You should be able to scale it up. But for whatever reason, bigger companies lose track of you know the world's changing so fast every day, so it's really important for companies to just stay involved, to understand, you know, like let's trade in some of these like
Mhm.
management meetings for customer meetings.
Right.
I recommend that for everybody, and it seems like there's a little bit of a fear about it or discomfort or whatever, but you know you do it and it's like after 2 minutes if it feels great and you learn something all the time. So if I could recommend something to any company in the world, just try to stay as close to your customers as possible. Make it a huge priority, because otherwise you're just going to miss out on opportunities. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so true. I think it's also the layers of bureaucracy that the big companies add.
Hmm.
And it's like and especially when you're trying to get the customer insight, well, talk to salespeople or talk to the marketing people. And then you
Hmm.
like the bigger the company, often I find that it's harder and harder to get to an actual customer because that information is being either assumed and being PDF'd or documented somewhere, or it's the older one
Hmm.
that you need to reuse. But to get to an actual customer, there's also this customer success guys who say, no, 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 we can't because we need to talk to them about XYZ. So it becomes this really weird battle of trying to get to an actual user. And it is a tough one. I agree with you.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I was at McKinsey, you often have to work with a lot of large organizations, and you know we have to play by the rules, of course. But there's just always this discomfort about talking with customers, and but what they don't realize is that this is what built your company. Like you understanding the problem is so much more important than the discomfort. So. Um, yeah, I recommend that to everyone. It's gosh, it's so important. Can't emphasize that enough. So.
Agreed. Sean, what is the one thing that people don't ask you about product design? that you wished they did on the
Hmm.
podcast, and maybe at the work, maybe at the bar, something that you don't get to ask, you don't get asked often.
Yeah, I think I guess there's always an assumption of like what designers do, which is, kind of uh, been created for through myth and mythology. Everyone knows Steve Jobs, and other like design leaders and stuff. And a lot of us think that we kind of do that every day, all day and stuff. And yeah, there's definitely like a subset. But there's also, I think, a vast majority of our lives is spent on like different types of problems and evaluating problems and stuff. So I think there's definitely like um, the thing that I'm not asked is like, what is design? I think, and it's funny because like everybody has a different answer.
Yeah.
For me, it's just about it's super simple. It's just talking to people, understand their problems, and then try to solve it. But I think for whatever reason, there's like all these different definitions. Like design is usability, design is like beauty, design is art, design is functionality. There's all these like things that get attached to it. But I think at the end of the day, all these other things, they're important, but the core thing is just solve a problem, because if you're not doing that, you're not really you're doing the job. We're going down the wrong road, and we're focusing on the wrong things. Yeah.
How would you differentiate, Sean, product design versus product management? Where do you draw the parallel?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's the different types of data that you use. Like product management is very quantitative, and I feel like product design is very qualitative. And what that means is like that we're kind of a little bit more touchy feely, and we interview more people, and we have to synthesize a different data set.
Mhm.
Feelings are really important, and the way people react is really important. We're really important at the early stages of the process when there doesn't exist data. For instance, like I could imagine it at the beginning of Uber or Lyft. Just the question is like, hey, we if you're demoing like this technology, you kind of fake it. Like, what do you think about this idea? And then you test it out, having a random person pick you up and bring you to the
Yeah.
airport, and just that qualitative idea of like, hey, how was it? Was that cool? Was that good? Was it weird? Or so on. Like that's where a product designer is really good. And then as you get more data later in the process, it's really important to bring in really good analysis driven folks that can really understand behaviors and stuff like that, the things that a designer isn't maybe good at. So they're really important, and we're really important, and we just have different tools, and we approach it in like a different way. So we have our weaknesses, and they have their weaknesses. So I think we're beautiful like yin and yang.
Hmm. And how much emphasis do you think, Sean, you would put on the pure visual component? So like wireframes, maybe
Mm-hmm.
physical designs in your work, in your world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's really important, of course, but tastes change so much and stuff. The example that I like to think of is like if you use Amazon and back in like 1997 or something. I'm sure compared to today's standards, it was a pretty terrible experience, but it worked, and people loved it because that it solved their problem. It got them their book within a couple days that they wanted, and that was it. So um, obviously, beauty and delight is really important, but for me, I'd say it's the most overrated element, which really
Really?
pains me to say because I'm like I love visuals, like I love aesthetics, and I spent most of my life and building like beautiful 3D websites and ads and stuff. So I love slick looking stuff. But the older I get, they realize it's not really that important at all. So
Mm.
yeah.
Well, there we go, Sean. This was great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure our audience will thoroughly enjoy those two great examples and other cool bits that you have shared with us today.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun.